Hi, my name is Joy Rizzoli, and this is my close reading from Letters from a Farmer number 4. The victory in the French and Indian War had a tremendous effect on the mindset of both the colonists and the people of Great Britain. For the first time, the colonies had something that had brought them all together and allowed them to unite with each other to fight a common foe. Up until this time, the 13 colonies saw themselves as 13 separate and independent regions. However, even though the war had improved the situation immediately, the colonies now had an outstanding amount of debt to repay, something that would soon prove to be very problematic. In order to get their money back, the king, along with Parliament, began to pass different acts and laws which were then imposed onto the colonists. One of the first acts that was passed was the Townshend Act, which taxed glass, lead, paints, paper, and tea. This became known as taxation without representation. Although Parliament promised to keep their views in mind, there was no representation, which led to the colonists having no say in the laws that directly impacted their lives. Another example of this that happened before the Townshend Act was the Quartering Act, which required colonists to house British soldiers and provide them with jobs. If all the houses were taken, or if they were too small, the soldiers were allowed to stay in barracks or inns. This, along with the passing of the Townshend Act, caused tensions between England and the colonies to rise drastically. Because of the rising tensions, when the Stamp Act was passed on March 22nd, 1765, the colonists were enraged. This act forced the colonists to pay a small tax on any piece of ink paper that they used, such as newspapers, licenses, legal documents, and even a deck of cards. Even though the taxation was a small amount of money, the colonists were concerned with the standard that it seemed to be setting. This was the first time that Britain was taxing the colonists simply to raise revenue. In the book, The Enduring Vision, A History of the American People, it explains that a growing number of the Anglo-Americans became convinced that the Stamp Act had not been an isolated mistake, but rather a part of a deliberate design to undermine colonial self-government. They argued that there was a big difference between taxing them for trade versus taxing them for revenue. At this point, many of the colonists began to act violently towards British soldiers in an attempt to get the act revoked. However, not everyone acted violently. John Dickinson, who was a Pennsylvanian lawyer and diplomat, wrote Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, which was a completion of essays that he wrote in response to the acts that were being passed. Many Anglo-Americans soon embraced his views. In Letters from a Pennsylvania Farmer number 2, Dickinson explains how even though many people didn't like the taxes, they were still constitutional up until the Stamp Act. Not only had the colonists not been consulted, Britain was doing it solely to raise commerce within the colonies. After writing this letter, there was a little bit of controversy, which led Dickinson to write Letter from a Pennsylvanian Farmer number 4. The second letter was directly addressed to the people who were objectionable towards his first letter. He argued that the Parliament had the right to impose duties. However, if the act was strictly to raise commerce, it should not be passed unless elected leaders from the colonists had also agreed upon it. Britain wanted to raise 60,000 euros annually within the colonies, which is now equivalent to 11,379,400 American dollars, including inflation. With the passing of the Stamp Act, Parliament would be able to reach their quota. However, the people were very unhappy. According to Great Britain, the different acts, laws, aids, etc. were put into place for the greater good of both of the countries. However, due to the Stamp Act, the colonies came up with a list of resolutions which were solutions to their grievances. The third statement was that it is inseparably essential to the freedom of the people and to the undoubted right of Englishmen that no tax be imposed on them except with their own consent, given personally or by the representatives. This is saying that people cannot be taxed unless the colonists or the representatives give their consent. One of the first grievances listed is that the people of the colonies are not, and from their local circumstances, cannot be represented in the House of Commons in Great Britain. This expresses the colonists' anger about having little to no representation in Parliament. Both of these are discussing the colonists' issues with the lack of representation in the House of Commons. The fifth statement offers a solution, saying that the only representatives of the people of the colonies are the persons chosen therein by themselves, and that no taxes ever have been or can constitutionally be imposed on them, but by their respective legislators. The colonists believe that the only people who should be allowed to tax them are their own government, not the government of Great Britain. The colonists were also upset that the people of Great Britain allowed the king to tax them and how it is unjust and unspirited. They expressed their anger by writing that all supplies to the crown being gifts of the people, it is unreasonable and inconsistent with the principles and spirit of the British Constitution for the people of Great Britain to grant His Majesty the property of the colonies. Dickinson then proceeds to poke fun at the British, saying that even if the colonists did find a way to evade the Stamp Act, their ingenuity would mean little to the king. If the colonists used parchment instead of paper, or used the old-fashioned way of writing on a wax tablet, then Parliament would begin to tax clothes, hats, and prohibit the production of tools if they hadn't already. And what little gold or silver the colonists would be taken. He then finishes off the letter explaining how the late Act of Parliament, which granted the permission to tax the colonists should be regarded and opposed in the same manner.